Nule Liptown Mali Pak, we are glad you are here. I am Francis Gray, the tribal chairman of the Piscataway Kanoi, and I am welcoming you to my ancestral homelands. We, the Piscataway Kanoi, are pleased to be a small part of this greater good, and we share the same philosophy as we speak for the waters and the land that the Creator has placed us upon. We ask the Creator to help guide us down the path that we have chosen so we may do so with honesty, dignity, and respect. We also would like to thank Mother Earth for all she has given us and for her to remind us to never take more than we need and to always remind us to always give back more than we take. Wanishi, I thank you.
Queen Quet, head from the body of the Gullah Geechee Nation. Rachel from Jacksonville, North Kakalaki to Jacksonville, Florida. From the shoreline where we ancestors in the day. Still holding from we tradition, holding from the drum, from we shows. Where many people come and don't see the cast nets and see us still standing united together. This true story that built the foundation of America, holding our traditions, paying homage to those who came before us, who built this land, learning our children who we da, down ya, who we be, still marching on proudly as Gullah Geechee, as one family, still standing when others thought we would fall. Nah, we da binya, we in the gwine no way, tall, disha da who we be Gullah Geechee, strong, united, and free. Disha, the my family.
O te moa I whātulo le pa I o le awhia, pa I o le tātou taiao le awhio tupu mee o atunu umamalo ese. O le alea se sewa te o langa vale a wala le mfua I loto mawhinangalo. O liva foi a tautai a wau tutu lilo le tai. Matango fia le tātou taiao e pe o le whalina ia moa ula e pauitoa. A whaftai le tua o tātou wheloa I malmanuia lumo nuu ai leo tua o nuu. Maole nei awa noa e whawhelo tuai I lo tō mamalu le whatau inga o manatu malangonga o I tuainga ese. Tā lofa lava. With reverence, I greet those who are gathered and note the sanctity of the occasion. I greet the honorable leaders and representatives from different communities and organizations. We thank God for the opportunity to meet on this occasion to celebrate our equity, diversity, and inclusion. Greetings and talofa to you all.
Our chant, Kumulipo, reflects the natural order of creation from the gods, the environments of sea, land, sky, and the people. E na kupuna, our ancestors, grant us the knowledge and wisdom from above.
E ho mai kai ke mai luna mai e o na mea huna noia o na mele e ho mai e ho mai e ho mai kai ke mai luna mai e o na mea huna noia o na mele e ho mai e ho mai e ho mai e ho mai kai ke mai luna mai e o nā mea huna noi au o nā mele e ho mai, e ho mai, e ho mai e.
E ho'omau, Capitol Hill Ocean Week, bringing balance, harmony, and equality for a healthy environment to live, learn, and work. Aloha.
Juan, Tingu Nanganui, o Nanganasasta Kuyach. I said, hello, my other self, which is the way my people greet each other every day, the Unangan of the Bering Sea, otherwise known as Aleut. We've been out in the Bering Sea for over 10,000 years, and we're still there. I said that my traditional name is Kuyach, which means like an arm extending out from the body, a carrier of ancient knowledge into modern times, a messenger. My other name is Ilarian Merculia. I am a member of the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation board and also the facilitator, the chief facilitator for the Wisdom Weavers of the World, which are indigenous elders from throughout the world. And they say that this is a time to focus on Mother Earth, that this generation will decide whether or not human beings are going to survive. She's survived, Mother Earth has survived for billions of years, she's going to survive billions more. It's a question about whether or not we're going to survive. And the answers are going to be provided by one's heart, not by the mind. The heart tells the mind what to do, and the mind's job is to implement that which the heart is telling you. This is Capitol Hill Oceans Week. Welcome. Otherwise known as CHOW 21. We're focused on racially equitable and just movements towards sustaining the world and oceans of the United States and the Great Lakes. And I hope that you take something back that you can do this year and from here on to protect not only Mother Earth, world's oceans or the oceans in the US, but Mother Earth herself. And I wish you a successful week. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me to Capitol Hill Oceans Week. This is always such a fun week, and I look forward to being able to gather together in person next year. For those of you I haven't met, I'm Brenda Mallory, and I am the chair of the White House Council on Environmental Quality. I'm tremendously honored to take on this role in an administration that is prioritizing climate action and environmental justice. As you know, conserving and restoring the lands and waters that support and sustain us is an important aspect to addressing both climate change and environmental injustice. That's why last month, President Biden announced the America the Beautiful initiative, a locally led, nationally scaled effort to conserve and restore at least 30% of our nation's lands and waters by 2030. President Biden's decision to set a national conservation goal for the next decade is historic. Never before has a president outlined a vision of this kind, and certainly not this early in the administration. The president's call to action is urgently needed. Climate change is reshaping our lands and our oceans and coast. And President Biden's early commitments for ocean and coastal environments are so important. These commitments include expansions of sanctuaries, habitat restoration, and estuary research reserves. It also includes collaborative work with the fishery management councils and continued efforts to support at-risk species. After more than a year of pandemic in which many Americans, myself included, found comfort and peace in the outdoors, the President's vision is offering us a much-needed chance to summon our nation's shared love for our common home, do more to safeguard the places we love, and leave our country better, stronger, and healthier for generations to come. Importantly, this initiative is one that puts equity at the center. Too often, our lands and waters have also been places of struggle, inequitable access, and injustice. When reflecting the best version of ourselves, we are a nation that believes every child should have a chance to experience the wonders of nature. And that's what President Biden's plan will do. One thing we know is that this initiative will only be successful if we actively engage local, state, and tribal governments, community members, and a range of stakeholders. So that is my ask of you. Stay engaged. Continue to offer feedback and guidance as we implement President Biden's vision. Our charge is to think broadly and inclusively about how to achieve conservation goals in a way that improves the quality of all Americans' lives now and for decades to come. I am eager to roll up my sleeves and get to work alongside of many of you. Thank you for the work that you do every single day, and thank you for inviting me to join you today.
Hello, hi. Here is starting of CHOW opening plenary, centering justice and equity in ocean and Great Lakes. My name is Yoshiota. I'm a moderator. I'm a research assistant professor at School of Marine and Environmental Affairs in University of Washington, and also the director of Ocean Nexus Center. I just wanted to clarify, my center is the independent organization, and we have a vision and a mission and agenda separately from our funders and affiliated organization. And I also like to recognize that our center in University of Washington reside on unceded territory, and we acknowledge all of the ancestral homelands and traditional territories of indigenous peoples who have been here since time immemorial. I'm an anthropologist and I'm ocean policy scholar, and by training, and today to begin, I would like to clarify this platform is not to mark any legitimacy to any sector, agency, or any organizations. I also like to point it out that there are power dynamics embedded in this conversation, and my role in this session is to facilitate the discussion by respect panelist voices. And so to begin, I feel it is most appropriate to ask each panelist to introduce themselves, stating their name and organizations, but please also feel free to speak with any information you like to add. So may I just start from asking Mike, please, if that's okay. Mike?
Sure. My name is Michael Roberts. I'm a Tlingit tribal member from Southeast Alaska, and I am the president and CEO of First Nations Development Institute.
Thank you. Jackie?
Hi, my name is Jackie Patterson. I am the Senior Director of Environmental and Climate Justice at the Naacp, based in Baltimore on unceded Piscataway Nation territory.
Thank you very much. Marcella, am I pronouncing your name? I'm so sorry if I did.
Marcella's perfect. Marcella's perfect, yes. Hi. Hi, my name is Marcela Gutierrez-Graulich. I'm the founder and director of Azul, and we're an organization based out of California. I am also on the board of directors of the California Coastal Conservancy, but I'm speaking here only in Azul capacity.
Thank you very much. And Summer? Can you unmute yourself, please? I'm so sorry.
No, I'm sorry. Aloha, Summer Silva from the Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation. I'm its executive director. We are a nonprofit law firm that has been practicing exclusively in the area of Native Hawaiian rights law for the last 47 years.
Thank you very much. It's great to have you all. And I just have to note it, I'm speaking not in my mother tongue. So my pronunciation and my sentences might not really make sense to you. If it does happen, can you please let me know? And then I'll try to rephrase it. And so, but thank you very much for this opportunity. I want to move to our first question, if that's okay with everyone. Okay, I get it nodding. So my first question, or the question for the panelists, is what needs to be acknowledged as we begin this conversation to build a just movement for ocean and coastal conservation? I'm going to repeat, what needs to be acknowledged as we begin this conversation to build a just movement for ocean and coastal conservation? I'll take any orders. So anybody feel like speaking first, please go ahead. If not, then yeah, I'm looking at you guys. So does anybody want to start? Okay, in this case, I'm just going to do this out. Marcela, would you?
Sure.
Thank you.
I think as we have these conversations and we start these conversations in the forum such as CHOW and in such an important forum, it is extremely important that we acknowledge the challenges that have been brought up by other folks that have been working on this aspect of the ocean conservation field, equity, environmental justice, access, and like you mentioned before, the power dynamics. It is, for some of us, been doing it for 10 years. Other people have been doing it for more than that. It is exciting to see this conversation finally take center stage, but it's extremely important to do this in the right way and to make sure that we are not glossing over the work of other people or just kind of like taking up the space or yeah, glossing over other work and the efforts and the attempts that have been made before. I don't think it's the sake of just kind of like rehashing problems, but I think that we need to know what is the lay of the land and where are we actually standing to make sure that we find our best path forward.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's really important to just look into it and then look for the path forward. And then I'll pass it to Mike if that's okay.
Sure. I just wanted to say out of the gate, so thank you to the organizers and the sponsors of this conference. It's very rare that you get to see so many Indigenous folks on an agenda. You know, as I looked out over the agenda for the next few days, seeing folks from Native Nations Institute, from the Makah Nation, from the Shinnecock Nation, from the folks at Chumash, unbelievable. Usually this is a group that's invisible and silent in most of these conversations. So thank you to the organizers and sponsors for that. You know, from a perspective on this whole JEDI idea, I would have to say this. One, great title, by the way. I've never seen justice included and think that we should do that all the time. But more importantly, I think what I see as an important part of this conversation is that we acknowledge that a lot of the reason that we're in the situation we're in is as a result of the arrogance of Western science and capitalism, and that if we expect to solve the climate change problems with the same capitalistic and Western science models, we're going to be deeply disappointed and probably fail miserably. That we need to get kind of past our linear and myopic thinking about this and really include other knowledge systems in the process. I would say traditional ecological knowledge is going to be first and foremost an important part of the discipline that helps us along in this conversation, and having a conversation that's inclusive like this one and a conference that's inclusive like this one is a very important part of that larger conversation.
Thank you, Mike. Can I ask same question, Summer or Jackie? Summer, thank you.
Sure. Also, I too am honored to have been invited to speak on issues of justice, equity, and conservation as it concerns the Native Hawaiian community in my capacity as an advocate for a nonprofit. And that advocacy has necessarily entailed fighting to preserve natural and cultural resources side by side, integrally even across our islands. So I think it's important to start with, you know, at least the Native Hawaiian people's origin stories, which tell us that, you know, we were birthed from kalo, which today continues to be a Hawaiian staple root crop that is grown on land but submerged in water, much like the islands themselves. These waters are fed by fresh, free-flowing streams that are themselves fed by rainwater that are then channeled into irrigation ditches that, after feeding the kalo crop, which is harvested to feed the people, return to their stream of origin. And those streams then make their way to the ocean, where they meet and give birth to new life and start the whole food chain cycle once more. And I sort of harp on this a little bit because our origin story, much like our stewardship of natural resources, relies on interdependence, this fair distribution of resources, principles that respect the needs of downstream users and maintenance. And all of this is actually environmental science. And all that to say that Indigenous communities were practicing this successfully pre-contact for a number of years. And so I hope that that kind of worldview and perspective is informing the conversations and discussions that flow from today's event. Thank you.
Thank you, Summer, for sharing it. Jackie, would you? Thanks.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So I also want to just give thanks for being on this opening plenary and the honor of being able to help to kick off this event. And in answer to this question, I want to kind of echo what others have said and really implore us all to be aspirational in defining what justice looks like, not just accept this notion of equity that means that, you know, that there's going to be equality across, you know, kind of what's a substandard set of goals already. We really need to make sure that we recognize that it is possible for us to preserve our coastal ways, to preserve our communities, that there's not this kind of acceptable loss that often guides the way policymaking happens and the way practices happen, that we have to really we have to act audaciously in recognizing that there is kind of more abundance than society and the narrative often gives us credit for having. Like there's this false notion of scarcity makes us say, oh, well, this is going to happen, that's going to happen, that's just the way it is, and we have to make the best of a bad thing. You know, there's certain level of adaptation that we need to, because certain aspects of climate change are somewhat baked in, but we also have the power to not make it worse and to really be, again, visionary and aspirational about what we can have in terms of standards of living for everyone, in terms of preservation of the earth in its, you know, in its best form and so forth. So that's just what I would say is in response to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, each of the panelists. I mean, it's very hard to say exactly what you like to say in such a short, you know, small space of the time. So I appreciate you made an effort to it. And it's when we actually had this conversation, we had a little bit of preparation among us, and there was a conversation about like, okay, what do we mean by beginning? You know, there has been so much conversation about this by the communities and indigenous groups and, you know, some of the social scientists. And so it's not really a beginning. So that's why our question about this acknowledgement, it's more about the recognition that there has been a conversation, but the conversation has been right or has been presented well enough. I mean, that was really the concern about the first question. And so thank you very much for answering those questions with your own voices. And so the second question, if I may, is that okay if I just move to the second question? Thank you. So I'm gonna ask a second question. What changes do we need to see to know we are building a more just and equitable ocean and Great Lakes, I think, in conservation movement? So I repeat again, what change do we need to see to know we are building a more just and equitable ocean and Great Lakes in conservation movement? So instead of what the community needs or anything, we actually wanted to sort of like ask you guys, what do you think us, including us with the conservation movement, to do to just really to get the bottom of just and equitable ocean and the Great Lakes? What is the things we need to do to look to see it forward, both us and conservation movement all together? Can we ask somebody to start? Perhaps Summer, would that be okay if I ask you to start? Thank you very much.
Sure. So given my background, I'm going to give sort of a case study perspective because I think that helps to tell the story happening in Hawaii in particular. But, in 2000, our legislature expanded its Environmental Policy Act, which is modeled after the National Environmental Policy Act, to include cultural impacts, which elevated cultural resources. That meant practices, traditions, culturally significant sites, including ancestral burials, to be commensurate with this idea that we were going to be preserving environmental resources and natural resources alongside cultural ones, and assessing a proposed use's impact on the communities around the state informed by that really promising and expansive idea in the law and in the policy. But 20 years later, here we are as an organization still fighting regularly to enforce those very well-meaning words and policies on paper in real life, and more often than not, failing to have the spirit and intent of those laws actualized. And so it taught us, I think, that it's not even enough to pass policies informed by Indigenous perspectives or the perspectives of marginalized people. We've learned that words on paper remain so if they too are not also afforded decision-making authority at every stage of the process, if they're not themselves part of the enforcement, if their traditional expertise is not afforded the same regard or respect as Western scientific experts, and if they are not too also part of the judicial arm applying the law to the facts on the ground in ways that are just, fair, and equitable. So I think we need buy-in at all levels, all the time, for all time, now and well into the future, in order to really see the kind of change that we'd like to see in the conservation movement.
Thank you very much, Summer. Can I ask, perhaps, Jackie, would you mind going? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll keep it short and say first off that we would know we've reached close to where we're supposed to be when it doesn't, we don't have to have it be notable by Mike, for example, that there are all these Indigenous people on the program, like when that's just the norm, the norm that we all just see every time. And similarly, not just on the program for this conversation, but in decision-making spaces, that we do have truly inclusive decision-making spaces and truly equitable, not just equitable distribution of resources, but equitable in that there is a redistribution that takes into account the disproportionately low distribution of resources to frontline groups, so that there is more capacity to be able to lead in this space. So those would be a couple of metrics that I would put in place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then I'm so sorry if I sound like a little bit rushing. It doesn't mean anything. Please do take your time to say whatever you like to say, any language of the time. And if I rudely ever stop, just forgive me for that. So for that, I'm going to pass it to Mike. Would that be okay, Mike?
Sure. I just want to echo what the two speakers before me have said, and I'm guessing that we're not going to hear much different from Marcella after me. But I come from an organization, it's a nonprofit, and you look at the way in which the foundation community has funded BIPOC-led organizations over the last year. They funded them at a level greater than they have in the past 5 or 7 years, right? And so I worry that this moment we're having as BIPOC people is a data point and not a trend. Until there's 2 years of panelists on here and 2 years of conversations at CHOW about JEDI, this diversity issue, then we can't really have a conversation about equity and diversity and inclusion, because it's not a trend, it's just a data point. And I would also echo a lot of what Jackie has said, and there's a overwhelming inequitable distribution of resources from the foundation committee to frontline folks doing the work in the not-for-profit community, doing the monitoring, doing the science, Western or otherwise, who are showing the disparities what's happening in their communities, in the waterways that they live on. And until we create some more equitability in the funding, the real dollars and cents, that we're not gonna have a more just representation or policy change. There's a statement, I think it's Indian, it might be Tlingit, that says, you know, money talks and bullshit walks. And I think we just need to kind of follow that.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, hard truth. And Marcella, please. You're mute.
Mike,
Okay, let's go.
right on the head. Yes, I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. One thing I would add is I think that as we talk about resources and funding and just centering BIPOC folks, I think that one thing that doesn't come to mind too much is whether the processes, the resources, and the funding are actually optimized or able to serve our communities. I can tell you, for example, we focus on community organizing, which takes a long time, which is resource intensive, which is not quite compatible always with the funding cycles, with the processes, because it's a different way of working, and it's not that top-down way that we see in the mainstream or Western environmental field. And so we need to, as Jackie said, be imaginative and look at everything. Like look at all the, not just the funding, but also the timing and the ways as we work on this. And I think that's for me is going to be a big marker on when we're really making progress. Was the word.
Thank you so much. And it was just a really simple question. And to be transparent, we're doing really well with the time. So I'm gonna add one more question on top of this. And it's basically, you know, what we need to do, what they need to do is really what you guys are doing. And then I just wanted to open up the floor for you to share what you're really doing. And I know it's unprepared question, but can you talk about action you're making, the program you're working? You know, if there's anything that you need to share with us, you know, this is a core and this is gap. Can you just speak about that if that's okay? Great, thank you. Right, Jackie, is that okay if I just start asking you? Would that be okay? Thank you.
Of course, I'm the introvert who needs the most time to prepare, but I will try to throw that out there. So yeah, a couple of things. We've started to do this work with since about 6 years or so. We've been working with the Climate Central, NOAA, the Sea Grant Program, the Association of State Floodplain Managers, and others to implement the sea level rise program. So with it, we've been working with our branches and chapters throughout the country, or in coastal regions in particular, helping to train those wasp just flew inside. So if you see me kind of scream and run, you'll know this just continue on. So we're working with those communities to help to assess their sea level rise risk and to develop planning around sea level rise and coastal preservation. That's one of the things we're doing. Secondly, and to also understand what policies are impacting their ability to be resilient to sea level rise. Within that program, we put together a delegation of youth, indigenous youth and African-American youth from coastal communities in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Hawaii, and went and did this linkages across the sea level rise continuum. So we had the youth were talking about their origin stories, their relationship with water, their relationship with the land, cultural, religious, otherwise, and really we're finding common ground around their relationships. And we took this trip to Iceland, actually, where there were these $250 round trip airfares that were available. So we were able to take advantage of those, and then had this youth delegation and really kind of went there to visit these ice caps that were going to end up in their backyards of their communities. And so really very beautiful youth really coming together and sharing their stories, and then putting together concrete action plans that they were going to implement at the state and local level. We also have been working with community by community around from Gulfport, Mississippi, where they're working on protecting their wetlands, to working with places like in Alaska, where again, there's another indigenous and African American work together around issues around coastal preservation and so forth. Yeah, I can kind of go on and on, but those are a few, just a handful of illustrative examples.
Thank you, Jackie. Mike, can I pass it to you?
Sure. So First Nations Development Institute has historically been a economic justice organization and really an asset-based, working from asset-based framework. And so, we recognize that for tribal communities throughout the United States, they have a certain amount of assets that they control, including, big pieces of land and water rights, and especially important things like jurisdiction that we think is terribly important, especially when we talk about alternative models to fighting climate change. It's very rare that you could get a local community, let alone a state or a national piece of legislation passed because you have so many disparate voices. In tribal communities, we think that there's some homogeneousness of the population that you can actually enact things at a local level or a tribal level that you could never imagine at a local or a state level. And so we think it's really important to put the resources back in the hands of Native people throughout the United States to and actually put the resources back into these folks' hands to do the work that we're talking about. First Nations Development Institute has created a new model, not a new model, but a new project called the Tribal Lands Conservation Fund. And let's not get confused here. We're talking about water here, and tribal lands isn't necessarily physical land. It's more of the sovereign ground that tribal nations own, including lots of coastal regions and the regions around the Great Lakes that we're talking about here. And so if we're able to empower the activists who are stopping the ecological damage, we're able to fund the conservation work that these tribes are enacting their own policies to do. If we're able to raise traditional ecological knowledge and put it on par with Western science and research and writing, then we think we've done our job. And that's what we're working on at First Nations.
Thank you very much, Mike. Summer?
Yes, thank you. Very similar to what Jackie and Mike have already spoken about, our organization grew out of a grassroots movement, and the idea of empowering Native communities to sort of design their own destiny, if you will, in a fair, just, equitable way. And one of our efforts concerns water rights and water rights management, although the challenges that Native Hawaiian communities face are myriad, and that water rights issue is just one small snippet of the work we do. But in recently successfully restoring streams that had been diverted for over 100 years in a contested case hearing that lasted over 2 decades, we have now moved away from just restoring streams to how to then, in this restored or restorative environment, do Indigenous communities then manage those resources in ways both complementary to and in partnership with the agencies that were originally charged with discharging those kind of public trust duties, especially after trust has been broken. And so giving voice to those communities, these are, the legal battles are protracted and resource intensive, as I think Marcella also pointed out earlier. And so really funding, supporting, creating ways in which Indigenous voices can continue to be heard and make a difference, and also manage their own resources is something that we regularly advocate for on a daily basis. So that's what we're doing at Native Hawaiian Legal Corp.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing it. Marcella, please.
Yes. ASUL's work, again, is very much relationship based. So our infrastructure are relationships. That's where we invest the most time. Obviously, over the last year, it's been particularly difficult because most of this is done in person. But what we work towards is creating those spaces and opportunities for people to feel comfortable participating. So I myself have seen it. You walk into a room and there's nothing, nobody that looks like you, nobody sort of you can relate to. It's hard to walk in and be part of that or feel welcome or even just, you know, put your hand up and participate. So what we do is we work to create these campaigns through cultural affinity, through local place-based locations as well. And so we create opportunities. Specifically in California, we have the Latinos Marinos project, which is something that we created a caucus in our annual lobby day. So Caucasian has the California Oceans Day. We had people come in from all over the state, but you know, I realized that there's a lot of people missing and there's a lot of people coming from certain places, and obviously you want as many people there, but we just didn't have a variety of viewpoints, and so we created this Latinos Marinos caucus, and out of, you know, we changed that within 3-4 years from being a handful of the 100 people that were coming to Ocean State, BIPOC people, to now the last time we had an in-person event, it was half of the people. So we went from 7 to 100 in, you know, 3-4 years. Why? Because people felt comfortable. People had a space that was theirs. Because more importantly as well, they were able to set the agenda. So people are not coming in and just advocating for everybody else's priorities. They're able to talk about what policies they want. They're able to propose policy. So we want to make sure that there's that space and the opportunity to participate. And that's where, again, the relationships take a long time and the trust to build, right? Because we get a lot of students that come in and, you know, I get on the phone and talk to parents all the time, like, yes, can you please let your 16-year-old fly to Sacramento with me? Or send them and I'll see them at the airport. And that takes a lot of trust. That takes a lot of trust building and relationships. But then those students go back and bring more people or bring their whole family or bring everybody because it's such a great experience. And that's how you grow. And again, relationship building.
Thank you very much. I mean, thank you for sharing it. I do hear, you know, a lot of things. And I do hear that, yes, we need a resource to work on. And we need a vision to work on, and we need a trust and so like step by step, and then we need time to build, and we need kind of like a momentum and an actual commitment to really push things forward. And I sort of like want to ask you this. There's been a lot of conversation about this engagement and inclusion and participation, and then, you know, personally, I don't really feel that's enough for really actually us to turn the ship around. And I just want to ask you wholeheartedly, you know, from your mind, okay, what is the things that, and I'm going to target it very clearly, that those people who are engaging in conservation in sort of like a very high level as a leadership level, what they should think differently, what they should act differently, what's in your mind, what would be urgent and then doable change that people could do either in their head or in their heart or in their action. Is that okay to ask you this? Thank you. So I'm gonna ask Mike, is that okay to start with you?
Sure.
All right.
You know, I have lots of opinions, and I'll share as many as you'll let me today. So, you know, we before we had this panel, we actually had a pre-planning panel, and there was a lot of head nodding that the conversation can't be about tokenism when we talk about inclusion here. That we can't put one brown person or black person on a panel or in a room and expect change to happen. That you're gonna there's gonna have to be resource sharing in a real way, and I mean resources, dollars and cents resources shared in a real way with Indigenous and Black communities throughout this country to bring them to the table as equal partners in this discussion, because you're not going to get the benefit of our knowledge and our deep historical you know, data and observations without, you know, us being properly resourced and heard. And so that would be where I would start. You know, I think that, as they say, that's a good start.
Okay, Mike, thank you. And this question is unprepared. So if you left out something, I'm going to keep some time in the end for you to speak, you know, whatever you feel like. So yeah, so sorry about this, but this is how the panel gets really exciting. So can I just ask, Jackie, is that be okay to ask you? Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So I think a couple of things. One, I was on a panel on engaging what they called underrepresented groups on coal retirement, which was along the same line, and so they asked us, a couple of us, to facilitate the panel. The first thing we did right off was to reframe the session and kind of really put, and out of that session, where we kind of came together and talked about how do we work more together as a consolidated movement, building power. The proceeds from the session were that was a report entitled "And the People Shall Lead." So it's not so that we recognize that there's leadership already in these groups, and that it's other folks that need to kind of catch up. And similarly, I'm actually working right now this week on finalizing this paper that it's called "Learned at Mama's Knee: NAACP Tales of Culture, Community, and Conservation." And it's really talking about all the ways that our culture already has these practices around conservation, and that we need to surface those and help folks to see that it's not about what the question I get so often: oh, how do we get Black people to care about climate change? How do we get Black people to care about environment? That in the indigenous practices, in the African American practices, like the practices are already there, the orientation, the relationships that we need are already part of the culture, and that we need the rest of the movement to really catch up. So that's and how do we make that practical is kind of the next question, and that's why actually we wrote "And the People Shall Lead." But for this high level conversation, I would just stop there. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. It's like we tend to, think nature and then culture separate, and then ask, how do we actually let these people to care about the climate change, care about the biodiversity loss, care about these things? We all do care because we live there. And then we all care because we have either kids or relatives or anything. Just like we know about the generation, and it's our place. But there's a different way of sort of caring it. There is a different way of manifesting how to care, and then that's, I feel, really important to acknowledge and understand. And yeah, it's yeah. Sorry, right? I shouldn't speak that much. Marcella, can I pass it to you, please?
Sure. Yes, like Jackie just said, and actually rehashing my 2016 participation here on CHOW at a panel at the time, just because you don't know that, or you don't know where people are doing the work, doesn't mean that they don't care. So that goes to my sort of other organizations. There's this idea, how do I get them to care? How do I get them to do this? And so that whole thing is just centering yourself. Like, how do I get them to come and do what I want to do? How do I get them to show up the way that I want them to show up? That's not it. So what do you need to do? You need to stop centering yourself. And it's really hard. So I actually empathize, and this is why I don't do much of that kind of collaboration one-on-one on diversity, because it really does need to be, as an organization, you need to be ready to say, am I ready to not center organization, to not put ourselves at the front, my ideas, assuming that only our ideas, our way of doing things. Because when you say, how do I get people to care? You're just saying, you're stating that the only way to do this is your way. And you're, blinding yourself to everything else that's out there. And so practically share the mic, share the resources, share the power, and share the spotlight. Don't center yourself. That's the way. Start at the top. When people ask me, okay, how do I do this? Start at the top, change your board, and go from there.
Thank you. It shouldn't be hard not to center yourself, should it? It shouldn't be. That's something, people know. Sharing first, care about others first. That should be the virtue. We may have to just get back to that, really, and then it's only the way to go. Summer, thank you, Marcel. Summer, please.
Yeah, no, I really am grateful for the thoughtful responses from the other panelists, because I feel sincerely and genuinely in the same way. And I think the conversation really does go back to values, right? Like empathy, humility, self-awareness, even accepting this invitation to speak on this panel. I was self-conscious about all the other voices in the communities that are different from mine, that are doing on the ground work, that, you know, I might be occupying this small space on this one panel to the exclusion of those folks. And if we approached science and conservation with that kind of humility all the time, I think we'd start to do real service to the communities that we're trying to work with, partner with, empower, uplift, remain inclusive, and yeah, provide space for them. So it is a matter of relinquishing power, space, influence, funding even sometimes, to allow others to occupy that space as well.
Thank you, Summer. You know, perhaps I should say funding should be all the time as well. If you don't mind, you know, when I hear about the community, you know, and people actually think it's just a community, and then they always wanted to sort of like seek for the scaling up, you know, regional scale, global scale, and all that sort of things. And you know, from what I really see is community is a globe, you know. It's that's what it is. It's a 99% of us, really. So, you know, we really shouldn't really distinguish in terms of scale, because you know, in terms for global and regional and then local or national and all this, it's just really all the same. It's the people living there, and then that's where the action is happening. So we should really allow us to just think about this, follow, you know, the abstract idea of the globe, but you know, get to the deep and work on it. You know, that's sometimes I feel about it. Now, we talked a lot about community and science and engagement and all this, and then, you know, perhaps I know there's students out there, I know there's science out there listening to this and really asking us, so what do we got to do? What should we do? How can we do it? I'm also caring about, you know, people, caring about the science, but that's what I do. So what can I do? I'm sure there will be a question to that. You know, I hear a lot of questions from students all the time. So would you just, you know, speak to them? You know, what do you think they should do? It could be either students or scientists, fellow professors, anything, you know, to the community. Yeah, what they should do to work with this. Shall I ask? Marcella, would you mind going first? Is that okay?
Sure. And you mean just students and people in general?
Students, scientists, professors, and, you know, people who actually are more on potentially academic side, or potentially thinking about like science as a part of the solution and as a solution in terms of training. How can they actually change their mind and more engaged with this equity and just both conversation and action?
Sure. Listen and learn, and it sounds easy, but it's not. For us, you know, there's certain rules that we follow as an organization internally. For example, sometimes we have to go work in a certain part that we're new to, and a rule is to make sure that we're engaging, we're working with, we're collaborating with the people that are working there. And the one thing that I've had, and I learned the hard way myself because I messed this up so many times, is there's always someone working there already that's local. And if you can't find them, you're not looking hard enough. And it may look different. It may not be the way that you're doing it. It may not be official. It may not be, you know, an organization that's constituted already as a nonprofit. For us, sometimes we work with, you know, grandmothers that were the moral leaders in their community, that were actually like a Catholic prayer group. Well, that's a moral leadership that you need to work with, right? And you can't just show up and kind of pretend and show people. Other times it's been moms that are working around lunches, etc. So listen, learn, and just kind of really learn where you're going, and try to have that self-awareness that there's always more to learn. There's always ways to grow, and there's for us, relationships first. And again, you know, look hard, because if you can't find anybody, we're not looking hard enough.
Thank you. Jackie, please.
Yes, I would definitely echo Marcella's comments for sure. And with that, to the extent that people might be in professions that aren't necessarily squarely in this world, like you never know what ways people go, but no matter what direction one goes in terms of career wise, to make sure that one is listening and one is vigilant for the intersections and how their work can advance climate justice, and so forth. And then also make sure that one is asking the right questions to get others around them to think differently about what they're doing and how they're doing it. So whether they're posing a question during a staff meeting or suggesting a film screening in one's workplace, just making sure to always keep the dialogue going, and definitely, as Marcella said, at the local level, making sure at the local level or regional or whatever level, making sure that they're taking direction and leadership from frontline community groups, and voices and analysis. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Can I pass it back to Summer, please? Not back to, yeah, can I pass it to you, Summer, please?
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to approach this question from a Native advocacy, not like a nonprofit advocacy perspective, and one with limited financial and human resources, limited power, particularly vulnerable to economic and political blowback for successful advocacy efforts that disrupt, status quo, the profit-making status quo, the power dynamics. I'd say to folks that want to help organizations like ours, lend us your technology and your expertise pro bono. Open your networks to us, share your funding with us, even better, your funding sources, hand over the reins of your conferences, your projects, your programs, your initiatives to communities like us. Give us more than one seat at the table, build your boards and commissions and power structures around the skill sets and the knowledge and the worldview we offer. And most importantly, regard our traditional knowledge with the same respect and searching inquisitiveness and reverence that you do your science, because they're as important.
Thank you so much. Mike?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. I'm not sure I could add a whole lot more than the folks in front of me, especially Summer, who did an amazing job summing things up. But let me try. I think the question was about science specifically, and I would say this, that current science practice paints a really wonderful two-dimensional picture, mostly because it's based on a few hundred, maybe a couple hundred years of data points. And I think there's a much more rich database out there to draw on, and that's traditional ecological knowledge, which has thousands of years of data and observation that would help scientists present a more three-dimensional picture of both the climate crisis and the possible climate solutions. And I also say that, from the indigenous knowledge system, you also have this multidisciplinary approach to a problem, which makes the solutions a lot more rich. I would love to expand the question to beyond sciences. I think that when we're talking about policymakers and funders, what's really important is we quit saber rattling. We can't just tell folks that if they don't do this diversity, equity and inclusion piece in their work, that we're going to quit funding them and then continue to fund them. As long as we rattle sabers, that this inclusion will never happen. Would be more effective if we actually gave the resources through federal policy and funding, or foundation policy and funding, to the Black and Brown and BIPOC-led groups themselves, and let them set the agenda. The power dynamic switches, and the inclusion becomes natural, not forced. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. There has been a lot to say about this, and particularly I wanted to pick up some of the issues with the power dynamics. That when people hear about the power, what does that mean? Basically, one trying to influence the other with the resource they have or with the rights they have to somebody who might have less, or we actually do have it, but might be having hard time to be recognized or enforce it. So this is extremely important if you're going to talk about Jedi issues, that we really acknowledge it, and we really have to commit ourselves, to work together, both through the science and then also the policy. That's what I believe, if you don't mind me sharing a little bit with that. So I would like to move to our final question, and it's not really I'm trying to just leave it with a high note or nice story or being positive or anything like that, but I just really wanted to hear from you guys. This world that we are in, how do you actually vision? How do you actually see what would be equitable and just, and the ocean, that you really wanted to have, or you really wanted to work towards? In my case, I'm Japanese, and I'm not indigenous Japanese. I'm just Japanese citizen, and then I have experience working with the fishermen in down in a small corner of the inland sea where the high development was going on, but the fishermen got together and then protected their place, their ecosystem, their livelihood, their rights, and their culture. And then I'm really hoping, I vision that's the future ocean that I like to see. I like to see those to continue. I like to see those solidarity with the scientists, everything to make our future ocean together. It's an equitable place to be able to kind of like thrive in the future. And then that's what I really like to see. So I'm going to pass it to my fellow panelists. If you don't mind sharing, what do you like to see? What is your vision for the ocean in the future or currently? If that's okay. Can I start with, it's hard, but Marcela, would you mind?
Sure. People-centered conservation. I think that's where it's at. I can tell you what sort of policies and goals behind it, and obviously, yeah, it's we can extol all over specific policies, but I think that when you put people at the center, all kinds of people, and not necessarily just money or profits, you will see a really big change in sort of like what I'm looking for. So for us, it's people-centered and all kinds of people, not just one kind of people.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. Mike, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think Marcella hit it spot on. I think if we are looking at, both practice and participation that is people and culturally centered, I think that we get a long way toward what we're all hoping for our oceans and lakes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Summer, please.
Yeah, I think Marcella and Mike said it well. People-centered conservation. In Hawaiian, we talk about aina momona. Momona means fat, but in the beautiful way, the bountiful, healthful, ever providing for, and it's a value, aina momoa, and a vision really, because we are talking about visions where the land and the water and the earth provide enough for future generations and present ones alike. And so that's the kind of vision I hope for.
Thank you. Jackie?
Yes, so very much affirming Summer and Marcella and Mike for sure. And with that, really making sure that we govern our policies and practices as such, so that we're not saying, oh, development needs to happen and let's try to minimize the impacts. It's like, no, what we need is to uphold the health and well-being of community and our oceans. And to the extent that development needs to happen, it needs to be within the confines of that upholding and that treasuring and that caring. And so I would add to with that I would like to see a relationship with the oceans and the coastal regions that's one of enjoyment, enjoying the beauty, enjoying the healing of the waters, enjoying the bounty, as you say, from the oceans. So really not just kind of not harming, but actually embracing and appreciating and living in harmony in that sense. So that would definitely be my vision. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we are about to time. Does anybody would like to add anything right now? And I'm sure you do, but you've been trying to kind to me, given the time and everything. But please, if there is anything, or if not, then I will. Oh yes, Marcel, please. I'm so sorry.
Again, I think it's exciting to have this conversation. I've been here at CHOW having some other version of the conversation 5 years ago. I think that it's changed and evolved quite a bit, so that is exciting. Optimistic and cautiously optimistic, but also excited and really hopeful. So thank you again for this.
Thank you. I think we can just go around for the small. Thank you. Thanks, Marcela. Mike, anything?
No, I'll echo that. I mean, I think this is a great start. I'd love to see it continue. So Gundashesh, thank you very much.
Thank you, Summer.
Yes, thank you to CHOW, but I also want to thank the panelists. It's been a really thoughtful conversation, and our allyship is indeed something I appreciate that our communities need to continue. So mahalo sincerely for your time sharing this space.
Thank you, Jackie.
Yes, thank you. Also, thank you to CHOW and thank you to you all. It's been wonderful sharing space and thought with you all. And yeah, I'm just also celebrating this notion of us pointing in this direction of, this world is 2/3 water. And so how do we make sure that we acknowledge and honor that fact and live in harmony as such? So looking forward to kind of working together to make that our norm. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for everyone. I'm going to close the session now. And I just want to thank all you panelists again to share your heartful response and then thoughtful answers and really to be very open about this conversation, which has been and we're carrying on. And I'm looking forward potentially, to work with you. And, thank you for giving me this opportunity. Thank you. I'm closing the session now.